Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week I've come to Worcestershire. The county as we know it didn't exist until the late 1990s, and it would seem that it's changed size and shape several times over the last few centuries. Did you know, for example, that Dudley used to be in Worcestershire, but that all changed much to the delight of Worcestershire residents in the 1960s when Dudley was kicked out of the county. Today we'll be exploring the county on a journey that'll take us from Redditch to Stourport on Severn. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and it would seem that back in the day, Redditch was a bit boring. Indeed, because my guidebook suggests nothing of interest to see or do when in Redditch, but at the time there were over 16,000 residents living here, a large town by all means, so what was everybody doing all day? Mostly working, it would seem. Since the Middle Ages, Redditch has been involved with the manufacture of needles, fishing tackle and hooks, and by the early 1900s, Redditch was producing 90% of the world's needles. More interestingly though, in 1906, the Enfield Autocar Company would set up an engineering works in Redditch. This didn't really work out so well, but they moved away from manufacturing cars and moved into motorcycles, creating the Royal Enfield brand of motorcycles, which was a great success, and they were manufactured in Redditch until the 1970s. Unfortunately, there's no trace left of either the needle industry or the car and motorcycle industry. But Redditch is home to England's only proper cloverleaf junction or interchange, and perhaps it provides the only reason to visit Redditch. You could visit the Forge Mill Needle Museum, but it's closed for winter, and I'm not making that mistake again. Well, that's a fairly underwhelming start, isn't it? Nice one, Redditch. We're going to move on, and our journey takes us along the B4096, which in the old days was still the B4096, but despite its low status, was one of the main roads leading out of Redditch. Over the years, it's seen a few changes following the introduction of the A448 dual carriageway. For example, where before we'd simply follow the road along, we now have to pass through this junction that was installed along with the A448 dual carriageway. It's a nice example of an early dual carriageway junction design that today would be best described as suboptimal. It features very short slip roads and very tight corners. Beautiful. The B4096 will take us into the village of Lickey End. That's a silly name, isn't it? And the only reason we've come here. In the days of my guidebook, Bromsgrove was a fairly sizable town with around 10,000 residents, most of which would have worked as nail makers. Living in fairly horrible conditions, it was common for the nail makers to put in 15-hour shifts in order to make enough product to sell and ultimately survive. My guidebook suggests maybe we'd like to visit what it calls old houses, and it's referring to the cottages and houses that the nail makers would have lived in and worked from. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, they no longer exist. They were demolished in the 1930s as part of a nationwide slum clearance, although some say that when it came to Bromsgrove, they didn't clear enough. My guidebook also suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Lickey Hills, so I have, and it's here that we find the Beacon Hill Toposcope, which looks a bit like a castle, but the toposcope is this sort of small display thing that shows you what you're looking at in certain directions. They're commonly found at the top of hills or places with decent views. I say decent, have you seen the weather? And even if the weather was any good, Birmingham's just that way. The castle that isn't a castle was reconstructed in 1988 to mark the 100th anniversary of the Lickey Country Park in which it sits. However, before this there was a smaller toposcope and structure that was later incorporated into the structure that we see today. At a massive 975 feet above sea level, Beacon Hill Toposcope provides a fantastic view of the surrounding area, which during the Second Small Disagreement proved to be very useful for spotting enemy aircraft as they approached Birmingham or the nearby Longbridge factory. To get to our next destination, we're going to pick up the A448, which, unlike the A448 from earlier, hasn't been upgraded or changed much since the old days. To get there, it's a bit of a fiddly journey through some back roads. However, that's only because I want to pass through the village of Bell End, so I get to say Bell End in the voiceover, and if you laugh, you're a child. Before we get to Kidderminster, I thought we'd make a quick stop at St Michael's and All Angels Church to visit the greatest rock drummer in the world, John Bonham. He was born in Redditch and he was the drummer for the band Led Zeppelin, but you probably know that. Welcome to Kidderminster. Like Redditch, my guidebook makes no suggestion of interesting things to see or do, which is strange considering at the time there were over 27,000 people living here. I'm beginning to wonder if the people who wrote this guidebook came to Worcestershire and just gave up. Either way, we're on our own. The town size is mostly down to the carpet and fabric industries, which have been traced back in Kidderminster to the late 1600s. Looking over an old map shows that this area would have once been covered with factories and mills, but today little remains, having succumbed to redevelopment. Of those little remains, though, there's the Slingfield Mill chimney, which stands over the town at 55 metres tall. It was built as part of Slingfield Mills in 1865, and despite being just a chimney, it's quite clear that some effort has gone into the brickwork to make it as ornate as possible. The chimney is attached to a steam engine house, which was used to power the mill that manufactured carpets and similar items, which it did so right up until the 1980s, after which the mill sat about for a bit before the main building was converted into a hotel, which has retained some of the original exterior features. The chimney and steam engine house are now a restaurant, but all of the buildings have been grade listed, meaning the original appearance has been kept and they should be around for quite a while yet. Due to Kidderminster's industrial heritage, it is of course no surprise to find the Carpet Museum right in the middle of town. But to the north of the town, in a place called Blake's Hall, we find the Drakelow Tunnels Museum. Carpets or tunnels? We're doing tunnels. The Drakelow tunnels were a bit of an unknown until the 1990s. Up until that point, it was a top secret military facility, which suggests it's not just a tunnel museum, and no, it certainly isn't. The complex was built in the 1930s at a time when the government were fairly sure that a second small disagreement was due imminently. In preparation for this, they built several shadow factories all around the country. Let's say you make aircraft engines, the government would build you a shadow factory to operate alongside your existing operations, and should the shit hit the fan, the shadow factory could be used to increase production of said aircraft engines. Drakelow Shadow Factory was operated by the Rover Car Company, and when the shit did indeed hit the fan, they were tasked with manufacturing parts and components for Bristol aircraft. There's around 3.5 miles of tunnels underneath my feet, which is a fair amount, I'd say, although interestingly, when Rover were here, it said that they didn't use all of the space available, and a lot of it was allocated as storage, and that's pretty much what became of the Drakelow tunnels. The third medium-scale disagreement came and went, and then the site was decommissioned and sold off in 1993. Fascinating stuff, but it's time to move on to our final destination, and to get there we need to drive through Kidderminster again, where we'll pick up the A451. However, Kidderminster is home to another museum that I know some of you will enjoy, so let's make a quick stop. Situated alongside Kidderminster railway station is the Severn Valley Railway and the Kidderminster Railway Museum. The railway opened in 1862, running for 40 miles between Hartlebury and Shrewsbury, and it survived for over 100 years before closing in 1963. Of the original 40 miles, only 16 miles of track has survived thanks to the Severn Valley Railway Society, who purchased the railway only 3 years after its closure. It may be fair to say that the Severn Valley Railway is one of the larger heritage railways in the country, and accordingly they boast an impressive collection of locomotives, both steam and diesel, but whilst they're certainly original items, when it comes to the station building, they're cheating a little bit. It's actually a reconstruction of a 1900s Great Western Railway station building built in 1980, although to be fair, they've done a very good job and I think it looks great. Coming up next, Stourport on Severn, which in the days of my guidebook was a small town with around 4,000 residents, but again, my guidebook makes no suggestions on interesting things to see or do. It turns out Worcestershire, at least back in the day, was really, really boring. But Stourport would have certainly been very busy. In the 1700s, the canals arrived in the town and it quickly expanded to become the largest inland port in the Midlands, second to only Birmingham. It all happened here at the Stourport canal basins, which were built in the 17 and 1800s, but despite this, most of it still remains intact, although in 2008 some restoration work was carried out. The canal basins were the terminus for the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal and would have allowed for the unloading and loading of goods between canal boats and the larger ships that would have sailed up and down the River Severn. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Till then, take care, bye bye.